Hello and welcome to episode 7 of Robins on the Wire, a Bristol live podcast covering all things Bristol City. It's been a bit of a week in the southwest with a 3-0 win at Hillsborough for the Robins, a takeover of the women's team, and we've still got a game to look forward to this weekend when Oxford United are in town. I'm Dan Carter, and as ever, I'm joined by Jack Buchanan. Jack, been a nice quiet few days of Bristol City.
Yeah, it's been interesting, hasn't it? Obviously, like you mentioned there, the women's takeover, probably the biggest news coming out literally just today as we're recording. Obviously, a lovely win up at Hillsborough. Sadly, couldn't make it to the game, but from what I've read and from what I've heard from mates who did manage to get there, it was a pretty convincing win in the end.
Yeah, it was an odd one. I don't think I've been to many games, especially Bristol City games, that have been that comfortable. I think we spoke beforehand, didn't we, that we weren't really sure what to expect, but expected City to have a lot of the ball. And in the end, it ended up being as comfortable a win as I think most fans will remember, really.
Yeah, absolutely. From what I've read, it almost turned into a little bit of a sort of pre-season friendly type feel, almost a training exercise. Come the second half, kind of blew them away in that first half an hour. And then you get it sometimes, don't you, with football? It's like sometimes you take your foot off the gas a bit, try not to injure anyone in the second half, and just get the 3 points. It didn't sound like Sheffield Wednesday were particularly threatening us, so you may as well just keep it safe.
No, I didn't think Radet Vitek really had a save to make in the game, from what I remember. I think we won't spend too long on it, because obviously kind of a lot's happened in the days since, but Anis Mehmeti's got a lot of the headlines since Saturday's game, and rightly so. It does feel like we're starting to see perhaps a more consistent version of the winger than we've seen in the past. I mean, his work, he's involved in all 3 goals, and I have to say, the problems he caused Wednesday in that first half an hour in particular, they couldn't get near him. And I think we've said it so many times on this podcast, haven't we, that, you know, when he's playing to that level, he's as good as anyone in the division.
Yeah, I think he's, like you say, we're seeing a consistent, and we're consistently seeing the best of Anis Mehmeti. Probably that we've ever seen, to be fair. He's been here, 2.5 years now. And this is sort of the start of last season, or first half of last season, and the start of this one is probably the best we've seen him. And like we've said before, he's almost playing without thought, it seems. And it certainly for the goals, it just kind of opened up for him, like almost perfectly on Saturday. And yeah, another great performance. Is that 3 goals and 2 assists now, I think, in the first 5 games? So you can't ask for much more than that, can you?
No, and the manner in which he took his own goal, I think the assist from Reese's goal is incredible, how perfectly weighted the pass is. You know, obviously it's a good finish, but he does a lot of the hard work. But firstly, I think it's worth saying that defending for Mehmeti's goal was really poor from Wednesday. But the way in which he brought down that cross from Twine, turned, and then just like almost rolled it under the keeper. I think he said afterwards how like normally he'd look to bend those like into the far corner. And I picked up on that, and I thought, you know, that's perhaps something we've not always heard from Anis. You know, that speed of thought to think, actually, the way I'm going to score here is by just nudging it through his legs. It's that sort of striker's instinct that, you know, it sounds a simple thing to say, but that could be the difference between an Anis Mehmeti scoring 10, 11 goals a season or 15, 20. I'm not saying he's going to hit 20, but if he can be that bit more clinical, you know, there's no reason he can't be knocking on that door, really.
No, not at all. I think he's got to be a hugely instrumental player for us this season. I think we've seen that already. First 5 games, one of the goals where he wasn't directly involved was Twine's at Derby, and he obviously made that really good run across the box to open up the space, allowing Twine to roll the ball in, and it obviously doesn't count as a goal contribution, but you're seeing that off the ball work, which is just as good as when he gets the ball at his feet. And yeah, like you say, it's interesting to hear that from himself, actually, talking about how maybe he'd look for want of a better word, probably the flashy finish in previous seasons, whereas this time it's just a case of just get the ball in the net. That's all that needs to happen. It doesn't really matter how it gets there. As long as it goes in, then obviously he has another to his personal tally, and we added a 3rd to our lead.
Yeah, I think the other main talking point I wanted to point at from that game, and I think it's something I've written about a fair bit in the days since the trip to Hillsborough, was Gerhard Struber's comments about playing away from home. I don't know how much you saw of what we wrote post-match, but the celebrations at the end of the game, I know Struber hasn't been one to do the fist bumps or anything like that, but it was quite an odd feel, because they kind of made their way over. You know, you're up in the top tier at Hillsborough, the away fans, and they made their way over, and all stood there clapping. Rob, the away end were doing their ooh sort of thing, trying to get someone to like bounce around, I guess. Rob Atkinson tried to push a few people in. Then they tried to get Gerhard to do it, and instead he just waved. And I asked him about it after the full-time whistle, and in a couple of answers, he kind of made the point that it's what we expect. We expect to come here and win. We're coming to away games wanting to win, and that probably wasn't always the case last year. I think Liam Manning said as much at some points last season. There does seem to be that sort of laser focusedness that we saw at home last season. He seems really keen to implement on the road as well.
Yeah, I think it's massive because I think everyone Liam Manning said it himself, I think it was after Coventry maybe last season, that away games aren't the priority. And I think that rubbed a fair few fans, including myself, to be fair, at the time, up the wrong way a little bit, because it's like, well, it's half the games in the season. I appreciate you always obviously want to win at home, and it's where you're, in theory, more likely to win and things like that. But the away games are literally just as important because you play 23 of both. So, yeah, to hear that sort of thing from Struber, and I think we were chatting about it as well, he didn't go over the top with his celebrations. Like you said, it's just turn up 3-0, get the job done, get back to Bristol with a second 3 points from Sheffield this season.
Yeah, and I think, a lot's been made about the fact, I think there was only 4 away wins in the whole of last year. So I know people say that, City's fixtures have been favourable, but if they'd held on for a minute at Derby, they'd be 1 away from matching that. I think it's easy to go, I think there's been a lot made about the fact I don't think Bristol City have played a team yet who aren't above 18th in the table. But I understand what people are saying, but I think we've said it on here. When the fixtures came out, you just said Sheffield United was a horrible game to start the season with.
Yep.
Derby away, I think everyone's expected them to probably be a bit better than they have done. Hull, I guess you can argue that the Hull and Sheffield Wednesday ones, before the ball was kicked, you were probably looking at thinking, yeah, if you want to be there or thereabouts, you need to be winning. But even Charlton, I think, it's hard. It would be unfair to say that that's a walkover. They've done quite well so far this season and made life really difficult for City. I just wonder after 5 games how you kind of assess the start. How happy are you? How excited are you is probably the better question.
Yeah, very excited. I think it's one of those, like you said, the first 3 I actually looked at and thought, okay, that's actually quite a difficult start because obviously we all expected the Sheffield United of last season, and now that Chris Wilder's gone back in there after Ruben Sellers has been sacked after their drubbing at Portman Road last week, that's probably what we'll start to see as the weeks go on. You'll probably get that sort of Sheffield United team back. It, for whatever reason, didn't quite work out with Sellers there. And then, yeah, Charlton, you know what you're going to get from a Nathan Jones team, but you don't know necessarily what you're going to get from Charlton back in the Championship for the first time in, almost half a decade. And then, yeah, you go to Derby, it's a tough place to go. Those fans are loud from minute 1, aren't they? And I've said that all 3 times I've been there, they're some of the best fans in the Championship, I think. And it's not a nice place to go. It's a very tricky game. Should have probably come away with 3 points actually, given the match, but I think everyone would have taken a point before kickoff. Was that sort of situation? Then yeah, Hull and Wednesday are probably the 2 you pick out that, okay, that should have been 6 points, and it has been, and that's what you expect, like Struber said.
Yeah, I think probably the more pleasing thing from my perspective, as someone who's watched this team, I've not missed like a league game now since last November. I think the pleasing thing from my perspective was the professionalism with which they dealt with them. I think there were a few murmurings on Twitter, I think when it was at 3-0 at half-time, and speaking to some friends who are City fans, of people recounting that Sunderland game back in the day under Lee Johnson, where I think it was 3-0 at half-time, and then I think he brought off Bobby Reed, and before you knew it, a couple of own goals, and it ends 3-0. That we've seen those games before where it's quite easy to take your foot off the gas and slip up, and like we mentioned earlier, they managed that second half really well. And if Mehmeti puts a left-footed shot a foot inside the post or gets his curled effort right later on, it ends 5, maybe 6, and we'd all be going, it doesn't matter who you play, to score 6 away from home's brilliant. So yeah, I think I understand why people are perhaps trying to mellow their expectations slightly because of the opposition, but I think no matter the opposition, that sort of professional performance deserves credit.
Yeah, 100%. I think it, like you said, it almost doesn't matter who you play. You can only literally play the team, the 11 men that are in front of you. And we've done that perfectly, pretty much, so far this season. I think 12 out of 15 points is the ideal, isn't it? So, it's exactly what you hope for.
Yeah, I think we'll move on a bit now. I think let's touch on the women's takeover news before we kind of look at the press conference and preview Sunday's game. Not nearly said Saturday then, but obviously some big news coming out of Ashton Gate today. Multi-club ownership group Mercury 13 are confirmed to have acquired a majority stakeholding in Bristol City Women today. That was announced at about midday on Thursday, so only a couple of hours ago for us. I was lucky enough to head up to the High Performance Centre earlier today to speak to both Gavin Marshall, who is the City Women's chair and Bristol Sports CEO, as well as Hannah Haynes, who is Chief Strategy Officer at Mercury 13, to kind of get a feel for the deal and what this means. I guess to start with, a bit of like your initial thoughts, Jack, when you saw the news. What did you kind of make of it?
I think it's very interesting, having read the press release from Mercury 13 and the post that Bristol City have put out on their Instagram with a few sort of quotes and interviews with the head coach. I think there was someone from Mercury 13 on there as well. They come across like they sort of know what they're doing, which is always good. And I think the most interesting part for me is the narrative has always sort of been Steve Lansdown wants investors, but he wants investors in Bristol Sport overall, or he wants to sell up on Bristol Sport overall. This sort of shows us that that's possibly not the case, and that individual elements of it, like the women and the men and the basketball and the rugby, up for grabs as sort of their own entities. I know they're still playing at Ashton Gate and they're still training at the HBC, which I think is massive. There's not going to be some sort of big shift from Bristol City Women to all of a sudden they're turning up in blue and called City of Bristol Women or something like that. It's kind of exactly what you want to see, really.
Yeah, I'll just read the first few lines of the press release we've got here just to kind of give people some clarity of what's happened. So it's Mercury 13, the multi-club ownership group dedicated to the advancement of women's football, has acquired a majority stake in Bristol City Women. After more than a decade of investment, the Lansdown family is handing over stewardship of the women's side of Bristol City to Mercury 13 and will retain a minority shareholding in the women's club. The first deal of its kind in English football is the group's second investment in European football, following its entry into the Italian Serie A with the acquisition of Como Women in 2024. Mercury 13 will usher a new era of dedicated investment, infrastructure and commercial innovation in the Robins. The acquisition reflects Mercury 13's belief that the women's club represents a unique opportunity to unlock commercial growth, elevate sporting performance and deepen the cultural footprint of the women's game in the city and its community. It goes on to mention, like you say there, the fact there is a long-term agreement that reflects the commitment of fan engagement and the matchday experience, including training at the High Performance Centre and playing games at Ashton Gate. I guess it's an interesting prospect because they don't own a club in England yet, and there's, like the press release mentions, there's not many examples of this sort of deal where an existing club is then owned by someone separate to the men's club they're connected with. But it sounds like a positive thing for women's football. The goal for the women's team has been to get back into the WSL. From the conversations I've had today, there seems to be an acceptance that this is the more likely way of not only getting there but stabilising there, which I think when you look at what happened to Bristol City last time they got up there, they found things really difficult. So for the long-term future of the club, it seemed really positive. I think, like you touched on there, naturally there's been a bit of discourse about what that means about the men's side of things. There's been plenty of reports over the last few days about supposed reported interest in a takeover of the men's side. It's an interesting position City seem to find themselves in because there's not many football clubs in a sort of ownership structure like Bristol Sport. But like you said, Jack, this does seem to show that with the right investor at the right price that Steve Lansdown is interested in doing business with, there would be a deal to be struck, you'd imagine.
Yeah, you'd think so. And I know we touched on it last week, at which point this has almost been flipped on its head since then, because we were like, there doesn't seem to be anything close, no rumours, anything like that. And then pretty much the second we come off the podcast, the Saudi Arabia rumours start flying around, and obviously now the women have been taken over as well. It's a very attractive prospect, I think, as a football club. It's probably the biggest in the Southwest, I think is safe to say. It's in Bristol, obviously a massive city, never had a Premier League team. You could with the right sort of approach, you could very quickly make yourself somewhat of a legend when like in sort of fan speak, I suppose. I think it'd be interesting to see where it goes with this Saudi Arabia rumor. That's the only sort of one that seems to have come to the forefront so far. Whether or not there ends up being any other bids and things like that, I don't know. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it all goes. I think is the main sort of takeaway from it.
I think I asked Gavin Marshall today, who is Bristol City's is it chair, I think, women's chair and Bristol Sports CEO, about the sort of the move today and whether that reflects a willingness to, I guess, have investment or a takeover of different parts of the Bristol Sport like kind of network or ecosystem without the whole package. And so his comment to me was, I think Steve's been very open about that he's been looking for investment, looking for the right investment and partners. Today is about Bristol City Women, and we're delighted that we've found the right partner to work with on Bristol City Women. So it was very much a case of his view, and I think when you listen to interviews, is that Steve Lansdown has been open about the fact that if people want to invest in certain parts, there's scope to do that. Today probably, I guess, makes that a concrete evidence, that can be done. The other bit we can touch on here quickly is on the Saudi Arabia rumours. We did ask, and I'm sure BBC have interviewed people today, as have ITV, so I'm sure they've asked the question as well about those rumours. We can play a clip here. I asked Gavin Marshall about those rumours and if there's any update he can provide.
Yeah, there's been a lot of speculation ever since Steve was very open around being open to investment. There's been a lot of speculation, and that's all it is speculation.
Yeah, so very much a case of the comments there suggest that it is speculation. I imagine that means it's not impossible. I'll be honest, I don't know the interested Saudi Arabian party myself. But the one thing I'd say is there'll probably be a lot of people interested in buying Bristol City Football Club. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the person Steve Lansdown's going to sell it to. And I do think it's a very interesting position. I've spoken to a couple of people about this, where I can't imagine there's many football club owners, especially in England, who are open to selling the club, but not desperate to sell in the club. When you think about this situations clubs find themselves in when they're looking for new owners, it tends to be like a Sheffield Wednesday situation, or like Bury back in the day, where it's a case of, or even Reading not that long ago, that thing of right, we need somebody now to come and basically save us. Although Steve Lansdown, you get the feeling, is open to it, it's not a case of he's trying to flog it for a pound.
No, absolutely not. And I think we said it off camera actually before we started recording this, takeovers typically don't happen for good reasons. Usually, like you mentioned, there are a few examples. Obviously, the most prominent one being Sheffield Wednesday. We've already mentioned them on the podcast, and they've got a lot of boycotts and things like that going on at the moment. And to be fair, I saw a fair few City fans getting in with the not a pound in the ground stuff that the Wednesday fans are trying to promote at the moment at Hillsborough. And more power to them. I think what's going on there is pretty horrendous to see such a big club going through. But anyway, yeah, it is an interesting one because it's, like we said, it's not usually the sort of positive news that you hear associated to a club might be being taken over. Usually they're being taken over because the current owner is, like you say, desperate to sell or has run them into the ground or something like that. Everyone would be quite happy if Steve Lansdown stuck around for another 10 years, I think. I don't think anyone will be particularly surprised by it.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting position, isn't it? Because I think he's got his critics. We've mentioned it on this, especially when we're spoken about the transfer window, but he has brought stability to Bristol City. And I think you only got to talk to the people I've spoken to today about the women's team who have, it's quite easy to forget what sort of job he's done in his time as owner of that side of things. It wasn't too long ago that Bristol City Women were playing Champions League games against Barcelona at Ashton Gate in front of a couple of hundred people as Bristol Academy. They are now breaking crowd records at Ashton Gate consistently. I've been to a few games there and the atmosphere is incredible. There's a really dedicated fan base that is Steve Lansdown's work that has probably made him as attractive a prospect to Mercury 13 as they are now. I think it'll be really interesting to see how the future kind of pans out under this new ownership for the women, because, having spoken to Hannah today, they were very adamant, that this isn't the same as Como, where they've come in and they've got an independent women's team operating with the same name. You know, this is different. There is a history, there's a legacy there of Bristol City Women connected to the men's team. And I do think the fact they're going to still be playing at Ashton Gate and still training alongside the women's team is, it on paper, it sounds almost like the perfect sort of medium between the two.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned it there, the crowd and the atmosphere at Ashton Gate, certainly during the WSL season a couple of years ago, and obviously prior to that as well. I went down to watch them play Arsenal. I think it might have been the first home game back in the WSL a couple of years ago. And they had a really good game, and the crowd was excellent. It was pretty loud. I think they had most of the Lansdowne and the Dolman full, which for women's football is great. Because, you know, unfortunately, it is still growing and things like that, which is excellent, but it doesn't always draw in the same sort of crowds as the men's football does. So yeah, he's done an excellent job, I think, with all of Bristol Sport, but especially the growth of that women's team. Like you say, when you compare it to, I remember being in school and they were effectively handing out free tickets to watch City versus Barcelona at that Champions League game, from my memory anyway. So yeah, the growth is gargantuan.
Yeah, I think, like we say, it kind of, how much of a direct impact it has on the men's side of things immediately, I think it'd be wrong to speculate. But it's certainly, from my standpoint, and this is a personal standpoint rather than anything I've been told today, other than what we've played from Gavin, is that it shows there probably is scope for, if somebody was only interested in coming in and buying Bristol City Football Club, the men's side of things, and didn't want to buy the Bears or the Flyers, if the deal was right and they were the right fit for Steve Lansdowne, there's probably a deal there to be struck. But I think that's enough of all the admin side of talk. So I think we should get back to talking some football, maybe something we actually know a thing or two about rather than business. While at the HPC today, been to see Gerhard Struber ahead of Sunday's clash with Oxford. And I guess the headline news, Jack, is that he says Rob Dickie is going to be fit to play. The defender was withdrawn at half-time at Hillsborough last weekend with I think it was a calf injury that they were not really an injury one they were managing. I think Gerhard said he'd been feeling it in training in the lead up, but really positive boost to have the big man available for Sunday's game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it lends itself to, obviously Struber won't give too much away in his press conferences when asked about lineup headaches and things like that, but you'd assume we'll probably go unchanged again on Sunday afternoon. I think if it's not broke, don't fix it. 2 on the spin with the same 11, especially after a convincing one. If Dickie's back ready to start, then there's almost no reason not to.
Yeah, I think especially that back three, I think it'd be fair to say there were 1 or 2 concerns, I think, at the start of the season, just how they'd cope with Struber ball, as it's been branded, I guess, with the high press. And, you know, I think Rob Atkinson and Rob Dickie would both probably admit they're not the quickest of players, but they seem to have coped really well back there, whether that be by winning the first ball. They don't seem to get caught out too often. No,
not at all. I think they've both been, and Zach Viner included, to be fair, in that back three have been remarkable. Obviously, we saw the Atkinson error against Hull for their first goal, but other than that, that's the only real sort of notable, okay, that's really poor defending, or poor mistake, or whatever you want to call it, I suppose, that's led to a goal. Other than that, they've all been solid. Vitek behind them obviously didn't have a whole lot to do on Saturday. You'd expect maybe has a little bit more to do this weekend. Oxford pose sort of a different threat while still remaining towards the bottom end of the table. Their games have been pretty tight, and I think Struber himself mentioned that earlier, that there are things that can go either way, and they could turn up and let's not fool ourselves, they could very easily still turn up and get a result against us. They're a decent side. Everyone's going to need to be at it, but hopefully that sort of back four, almost including Vitek and the 3 centre halves, will come to fruition again and help us out.
I wanted to touch on that one though, because you mentioned him. I think he's someone we're given an awful lot of praise, given the speculation around him, and rightly so. I thought the way in which he moved across the back three last weekend was really positive. Do you think it's slightly gone under the radar how consistent he's been at the start of the season? Because I think we've given a lot of praise to Rob Atkinson on the other side, perhaps because we'd almost forgot how good he was. Zach Viner is that thing of, it's kind of just almost what you've come to expect now, is a pretty solid championship defender, and that can't be undervalued.
No, not at all. And I think I said this to my dad and one of my mates last season, is last season he almost didn't look as good because he wasn't having to do the flashy last-ditch tackles because he had better players around him than he had done in years gone by. I think you go back 2 years when Zach Viner really started to show how good he was in that, I think it was 2022-23 season. So 3 years now. And you could see an excellent player, but he was having to get us out of jail quite a lot in that season under Pearson. And it kind of became less and less. And then this season, he's not having to get us out of jail, but you can just see those three work perfectly well. And like you say, Rob Atkinson has probably got most of the praise because A, obviously he's excellent, but B, like you said, having not played for us for 2.5 years going into the start of this season. I think it was February 2023 when he did his leg up at Sunderland. Obviously, we saw him play for Portsmouth last year, but how many City fans would have necessarily paid attention to that is kind of a mixed bag. But yeah, I think all three of them have just been exceptional, haven't they? But yeah, especially Viner, obviously, as we know, he had that interest from Wrexham and we managed to stave it off, and he still hasn't been tied down to a contract yet, but I'm hoping that comes sooner rather than later, as I keep saying.
Yeah, I think those are really interesting discussions and something we've spoken about before, but I think what the extensions remain unsigned is going to be a topic of conversation amongst supporters because it doesn't help that it's him and Mehmeti who are out of contract and have been playing really well. I guess the other probably decision facing Gerhard Struber, if you have to, like I say, I think unchanged is a real possibility, but there will be some that are keen to see Neto Borges get a first run out. I'm just sort of intrigued at where you are with that, Jack, because I think when we spoke last week about the team, you were very, very keen to see him involved. Where do you stand now?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I still like it. I haven't seen like extended highlights or a full match replay or anything from Saturday. I know he came on towards the back end of the game, but how did he look, basically? Because I haven't actually seen a whole lot of it.
Yeah, it was like an odd little cameo, really, because, the game had been done for so long that it was properly fizzling out by the time he came on. But I thought what I liked was he seemed to get on the ball in quite like deep areas. There was the main thing I remember him doing was it was almost like the ball got switched across to him, and he just got it out his feet and stung a like pass into Mehmeti, who was like, if he was out on the like left back position, he almost stung it into him in like a left attacking midfield on the edge of the box. And I think that's what we're going to get from him. I think that's what you're going to have to expect, is that I don't think he is a campering bomb to the byline and smash a ball across the box. The impression I've got from what I've heard from Middlesbrough fans and that little glimmer we saw the other day is that he's going to be someone who's going to be trying to work the ball into the area. And we spoke to Emil Rees today, and it's something he mentioned that he was really looking forward to playing to him because he thinks he's the sort of player that's going to get the ball into the box for him. I do think there's an interesting decision to be had there just because of how we're kind of expecting Oxford to set up. I imagine they're probably going to try to dig in and stop the attacking talent City have at their disposal. And I think Gerhard Struber made a point last week about Borges having a real ability to unlock a low block. So I do wonder if there's a chance he might get his first start.
I don't think it would surprise me. I'd like to see it, like I said, but I think maybe the more likely outcome is he gets half an hour, 40 minutes in the second half just to continue trying to... I know he's been here since kind of the start of the international break, but just to try and build those minutes and bed him into a match situation a little bit slowly. If he came on and had a good cameo, obviously that's excellent. But like you say, in a game that was already done, if it's 1-1 on the 60th minute against Oxford, for example, it's a very different situation to come on. Maybe he comes on, changes the game, and then earns himself a start at Preston.
Yeah, I think it's also that awkward thing, and it's kind of the conversation we've had with Max Bird for about 3 weeks now, of who should drop to get these guys in. Because, I guess with Borges, you could say Mark Sykes was probably quite quiet up at Hillsborough. Maybe you drop him, flip Ross McCrory back over to the right and start Neto on the left. But equally, McCrory and Mehmeti have seemed to have formed a really good bond down that left side. And I think you can make I think Liam Manning made the argument last year, and you could make the same argument this year, that arguably McCrory's looked just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, as the left wing back than he has the right.
Yeah, 100%. I think he's excellent on either side. I know you did a press conference with him a couple of weeks ago now, and he was saying he is obviously more comfortable on the right, finds it's a very different situation switching over to the left, but that he's pretty comfortable either side, and we've seen him score a lot more from left wing back than he did right wing back. which has been interesting, especially at the back end of last season. Obviously, we've seen him get a goal and 2 assists so far this campaign. But I think it's definitely one to take into consideration. I think come 1:45 now, isn't it? On Sunday, it'll be very interesting to see what the lineup is, mainly in that sort of wing back area. I think everything else, maybe barring Max Bird, kind of picks itself.
Yeah, you've almost got to feel a bit sorry for Max Bird, don't you? Because I can't really ever think of him putting a foot wrong in a Bristol City shirt, and through absolutely no fault of his own, he's come back from this injury. Adam Randall and Jason Knight are playing some of the best football of anyone in the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that, I don't know how he was like. Did he come on at Hillsborough? I think he did, didn't he?
Yeah.
And especially against Hull, which was the last game I was at, he came on for that last sort of 20 minutes or so. Obviously scored a goal, had some really positive moments outside of that as well. But then obviously you've got Jason Knight, who is virtually undroppable. I think we saw that almost re-emphasised by Struber today in his press conference comments, saying any Championship manager would be buzzing to have him. Adam Randall's playing very, very well. I think the last 3 league games we've seen a different side to Adam Randall now.
Do you think just how good Jason Knight has been this season's gone slightly under the radar? Because I asked the question to Gerhard today, because from my point of view, we do player ratings every week, and quite often last season it was a case of you almost didn't have to watch what he was doing. Your eyes were just drawn to him, and you'd give him an 8 out of 10 because he was almost always the best player in red and white on the pitch. This season, it's not like he's been any worse, but just because of how well the people are playing around him, it feels to me a bit, and this is from my perspective, that I've maybe not given him the credit he deserves for what has been another really good start to the season.
I think it's very similar to the Zach Viner point I made earlier about how he almost stands out less now because he's got Adam Randall doing very similar things almost just as well next to him, and kind of better quality all around him, especially in the attacking area, so he doesn't quite have to drag us forwards as much as maybe he did at times last year. And yeah, obviously he's still been absolutely sensational. It's the same Jason Knight we've seen this is the 3rd season now, isn't it, that he's been here. And to be fair, I remember very, very few poor Jason Knight performances in that time. Obviously playing every minute of the league season last year, on track to do the same this season. Absolutely sensational. But yeah, maybe going slightly under the radar, but I'll be honest, as far as I'm concerned, that's a good thing. If we can get almost the fewest eyes on him, the better, because it means he's hopefully, touch wood anyway, less likely to go in January.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, Gerhard's comments. You mentioned them there about him, and he was really keen to emphasise just how good a footballer he was, but the sort of person he was next to that. And it's odd, isn't it? Because when you watch, I don't feel like he's not a screamer or shouter. I think Ross McCrory, who was mentioned, is very much a very vocal player on the pitch. I think even Rob Dickie's perhaps a bit louder. You can see him. I always think of Cal Naismith as kind of the loudest I've ever seen. If you ever saw him play in a pre-season game or an under-21s game at the HBC, that Scottish accent would like bellow around the ground. It's like non-stop. Jason Knight doesn't seem to be quite like that, but he seems to only be growing as a leader. And I think, Liam mentioned it a lot last year, but I thought the praise Gerhard gave him today it really stood out to me, because for a manager to be that open, a manager who quite often doesn't like talking about individuals as well, to be that positive about his skipper, or his El Capitano, as he keeps calling him in press conferences, it really stood out to me that just how important he must be to that change room.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it there. Struber mentioned it as well, that we've got a lot of leaders. And Jason Knight at 24 with like 275, I think I've just worked out to be, league appearances under his belt in the last 6 years or so is pretty incredible, isn't it, really? It's no wonder, really, that he's gone almost straight into that captaincy role at City after sort of a year or so at the club, wasn't it? He's been, just always just something special about him, I think, isn't there? I think he always gives that 110%, and as fans, that draws you to him even more. I remember Nathan Baker, probably my favourite City player of all time, because every time he stepped on the pitch, he got a head injury because he was constantly giving his all and throwing himself in front of everything. And Jason Knight, very similar, obviously, in the midfield, going after every battle, trying to win every ball. Like a Duracell bunny, I think we compared him to a couple of weeks ago. He's just an incredible, incredible footballer, isn't he?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, he's had that licence to get forward as well. I think Fev shared a screenshot the other day of there was a moment in the first half at Hillsborough where I think it was either him or Twine was on the ball, and you had like all 10 outfield players from Sheffield Wednesday running back towards their goal. And I always think if you're Jason Knight or Scott Twine in that moment, that must be the dream to have players running away from you, space to drive into and players to hit. And I think, you saw that in the goals the other day. It was his smart pass that found Anis in the lead up to Emil Reese's goal. He's probably a better footballer on the ball than we give him credit for, because we all kind of think about the nipping in and winning the ball, those scrappy tackles in the middle of the park. But yeah, I think he has been top, and he's so important to that team that perhaps I think it'd only probably be if he ever comes out of it that you'd realise how much he does. I guess the other point you touched on there with the unchanged team is the front three. That's obviously the alternative way of getting Max Bird in, you'd imagine, is taking out one of Mehmeti or Twine. And a bit like we said, we're trying to fit Neto Borges in. You can't even imagine making that sort of change if everyone's fit, can you, with the way Mehmeti, Twine and Reece have been combining?
No, I don't think at the moment you can actually drop any of them. As much as I'd love to see Max Bird in, it's a case of obviously you lose Twine, you lose that creativity and set piece danger. I know Max Bird can hit a corner and stuff like that as well, but definitively he cannot take a free kick like Scott Twine can. If you get something in that sort of shooting remit, 9 times out of 10, it seems to at least find the target and often go in. And Emil Reece, obviously, we know he can't be dropped. He's on fire at the moment, 3 goals in his last 2, and same ran as Mehmeti. I think we spent a bit of time at the start of this podcast talking about him. It is a case of who comes out to fit Max Bird in as good as he is.
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? Like, I think we all agreed that City have had a good summer transfer window, but I think it almost feels a little bit surprising that when you've only brought in, was it 5 players in the end, that you've ended up with the depth they have done. I think obviously we've spoken so much about the striker, so we won't touch on that, but every other position of the pitch now, Max O'Leary's coming back soon. You've got another goalkeeper there. You look at George Tanner came on and was great at Hillsborough. Joe Williams and Max Bird are both going to be fighting for a place in midfield. Hirakawa's not started a game for a fair few weeks now. Neto Borges hasn't got in the team yet. Hayden Roberts hasn't had a sniff in the Championship yet. There's a real strength in depth that I think Gerhard spoke about it today. While it's a bit of a headache to try and keep everyone happy, what a problem to have, especially if you're ever looking to change a game.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it yourself in that press conference. It's not going to be long until we've got Tuesday, Saturday. I think we've literally got it in 2 weeks' time when we play Preston, Ipswich, and QPR in the space of a week. From Oxford this Sunday through to that QPR game, you've got 4 games in the space of 2 weeks. It's got to be the time to start. Maybe one of those games you drop Randall for Bird. You take McCrory or Sykes out for Borges or Tanner or something like that. And that's when you start to see that little bit of rotation, and the depth, hopefully, really comes to the forefront of just how good it can be. Yeah,
and there's going to be some big decisions to make for those games, I think, because, we've not seen Rob Atkinson play 2 games in a week yet. Do you take that risk? Equally, he's been so good. Similarly with Max Bird, where we don't actually know where he's at fitness-wise. Where do you throw someone like Joe Williams or Josh Stokes back in when they're back? I know both of those two might be a bit further away, but it's got that feeling. I think we spoke about it earlier, that there's been a bit of talk about just how good a start has this been given who City have played so far this season. You get the feeling in the space of, let's say, a month, by the time we hit that October international break, and you've had your first run of 3 Championship games in a row, you've had Ipswich, they showed at the weekend just how good they can be. You get the feeling that could be the point where we kind of stop and go, okay, just how good is this team and what could they achieve this season?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's your next. Well, I think we said it before the start of the season. September international break, you assess that first block of 4. Then you go into the October one. You assess the first 9, but obviously that block of 5 from September through to the following international break. And I think if we turn up at Ashton Gate in a couple of weeks on a Tuesday night and manage to beat Ipswich, or at least take a point, having got other good results around it, then you start to think, okay, maybe we are actually onto something here. If they turn up and do what they did to Sheffield United the other night at Ashton Gate, which God willing they won't, it looks very different whether you got good results around it or not, because that's your next sort of big test, I'd say. On paper, I think those are the 2. Sheffield United, obviously, we managed to brush them aside, given the sort of circumstances they're in as well. And then Ipswich was the next, right, okay, that's another team that's definitely got to be in and around it, you'd assume anyway. if you can beat them, then it's massive.
Yeah, and I loved I like to point out, I did the story the other day. I did not mention automatic promotion in the post-Wednesday press conference, but another journalist did ask whether top 2 was an aim and an ambition for Gerhard this season. I liked his comments about, we're not dreamers. We're going to work hard. I think Max Bird's similar, where he said like something along the lines, if we don't talk about where we want to be, we literally come in, train, have fun at training, talk, have food, go home. Gerhard echoed it today. Emil Rees echoed it today. They're not setting this target of this is where we need to be. They all kind of just know where they want to be, and they're not diverting their attention from that. And I think, that seemed to be a real characteristic of Liam Manning's team last year, was that every time we spoke to him, especially Liam himself, it was a case of, we don't look at the table, we don't set targets, we don't do this, that, just this game, each game as it comes, and see where we end up. And, it seems stupid to be talking about when there's still 41 games to go, but the points they've got early on, they could make a difference come the end. So they deserve credit for this start, definitely.
Yeah, 100%. I think you almost flip it for last season when, the first 2-3 games were all right, but then we went in a bit of a dry spell, didn't we? Especially around Christmas, where we really were not playing very well at all. From the 4-0 against Plymouth to Boxing Day against was it Portsmouth? I think we played on Boxing Day. There was a really quite barren spell of results. West Brom always the one that sticks out. It was freezing cold, and we didn't get near them. Those are the points that made Preston at home on the final day of the season such a sort of tension-filled game for us, because we were going into that last 6 minutes of injury time at Bramall Lane, and the ground was dead silent, waiting for the full-time whistle there. If we'd have picked up 2-3 more extra points there, we'd have ended up in 5th and played Sunderland instead in the playoffs, and various things changed from there on out. Like you say, those points come the end of the season are massive. It doesn't matter when you pick up the points. You look back at the side that went up from League One 11 years ago. They were just solid the whole way through. It doesn't really matter. You don't want the dribs and drabs. You want the consistency with however many losses inevitably kind of sprinkled in as you go.
Yeah, and I think I was looking at it after Saturday's game. I'm pretty sure that if City win on Sunday, it would be their best start to a championship season since they were promoted back in 2015. I think the only time they did better, and this is probably a bit of tale of caution, the only time they've done better after 5 games than they have done now was Dean Holland's season in charge, where I think they might have, were they top at, they were definitely top at the first international break, weren't they? They were flying. So that's the only time they've done better than they have done now. Obviously, we all kind of know how that season ended, so that's like, I don't want to worry people, but
those points were massively important when you gone down otherwise.
And that's kind of almost what I mean is when you actually look at, I saw a graph the other day of the teams that are leading the league at that stage, more often than not, they do keep the pace. And I know people will go, they have an easy start. They're only easy starts because they've won the games. If they'd lost any of those games, no one would be calling them easy games. I think just bring the focus back around to Sunday, I do think it's an interesting test because it almost seems a bit like a repeat of that Charlton game where you've got a team that expect to come in and make life really difficult. Obviously, Hull, it didn't really turn out like that. Both teams were so open. I mean, I still don't think I've still quite recovered from that game. But if City can get a result against a team in a bit more of a low block on Sunday, it would be a statement of intent, no matter Oxford's start to the season, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it will be a similar-ish game to that whole one. I'm just looking, and Oxford haven't kept a clean sheet yet this season in the league. So hopefully we'll score. Now I've said that, you're in for a boring 0-0 like Charlton was, but hopefully we can put a few past them. I think I read something earlier or the other day that last season we only scored 3 or more 4 times throughout the whole season. We've already done it 3 times, 3 victories this season. So long may it continue. Hopefully we can turn up and put a few past Oxford in the Liam Manning derby, as I'm going to dub it.
Yeah, I wonder if you might get all 4 sides of the ground chanting a similar thing that I'm not going to repeat, perhaps, as was the case at times last year. I guess probably the place to kind of end today would be on score predictions then, because we've done so well. Did you say 3-0?
I said 3-0, mate. I said 3-0 last week.
I did when I was
We're going
sat
to
there.
send people a tally of this. If someone in the comments could do
Yeah.
it for me, that'd be excellent.
I was gonna say, I thought you had done. When the third went
Yeah.
in 30 minutes, I thought my 1-0, whatever it was, I think I said 2-1. I thought it was going to get blown out of the water, but they're obviously fixing it just for you, Jack.
Exactly.
I guess this weekend, then, what does your mystic power tell you? What do you see happening?
8-0. Nah, I'll go with a nice 3-1 win.
Yeah, nice. I don't know why, I've got a bit of a Gary Rowett at Ashton Gate feeling. I don't know if there's any stats to back this up, but I've got a memory or two of his Birmingham teams causing Bristol City problems in the past, and so I'm going to say 2-2, and that is a way of trying not to jinx it more than what I think, because I've really enjoyed this start to the season. I've kind of forgotten what it's like to lose in the Championship. It feels like we'll cover a losing team, so it'd be nice if the run continues, and I think it probably will. But I do think these are the sort of games where fans in particular can be quite guilty of being a bit complacent. And I think on a Sunday the atmosphere is already going to be a bit weird, isn't it? Because let's be honest, none of us want to be at Ashton Gate on a Sunday afternoon. We've all got church and more important things to go to. So
Toby Carver.
Exactly, Toby Carveries and things like that. Sunday league football. So to be quite honest, I think it'd be a bit weird. But yeah, I'm quietly confident. I think that's the impression I got from Emma Reese and Gerhard Struber today. I don't think they're ever going to come out and say we should win a game, but I think Emma Reese probably got as close to that as you possibly can today. So, like I think we've said it a few times, it feels like the sort of game you probably need to be winning if you want to be top 6 or above. Yeah,
100%. I think very similar to Sheffield Wednesday. Obviously, slightly different dynamics in terms of a home game rather than an away game, but Struber seem to think that makes very little odds, which I like. I can get on board with that. Hopefully, we can turn up and put in effectively the same performance yet again.
Yeah, well, perfect. I think that pretty much does us today. A bit shorter today, but weirdly, it's been almost quite quiet week. Things are going a bit too well around Ashton Gate for us to have anything to talk about. So we'll leave it there. Once again, thanks everyone for listening. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe. We're doing an episode every week. Spotify, if you can give us a rating. I think the same with Apple Podcasts. We're going to try to get one of these out every week. We've done pretty well so far throughout the season. But we'll be back with you after the Oxford game. And once again, Jack, thank you very much for your time.
Cheers, mate. Thanks everyone for listening.